I introduced a constitutional amendment
I'm
called,
aware of that.
called the Get Corporate Money Out of Politics Corporate Constitutional Amendment. And basically what it says is just a very few simple things. One is that money is not speech. Two, corporations are not people.
Democratic Visions is handmade by volunteers for the entire metro region by DFL Senate District 42.
I'd like to turn now to something that's near and dear to my heart, which is any way that we as citizens can take effective action against the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. That 190-page decision with a scathing dissent by Justice Stevens essentially stated that the First Amendment prohibits the government from placing limits on independent spending for political purposes by corporations, striking down all portions of the McCain-Feingold bill, which barred for-profits, not-for-profits, and unions from broadcasting election communications. Now, corporations and unions may directly and expressly advocate for election or defeat of candidates for federal office. How can we as citizens counter that case? Because we now see money flowing in obscenely into elections.
You're right, this is a great threat to democracy, but there's a number of things we can do. In the near term, we need a bill to require any of these companies that would electioneer, any corporations or anyone, to have to disclose who they are and the source of their money.
Much like that brouhaha we got into in the gubernatorial election,
right,
where there were corporations trying to give money to front groups for Tom Emmer?
That's right, that's right. And companies like Target and others had some splaining to do, as my mother might say.
Yeah.
And so they actually had to back up off of that. So the disclose, we need an act to make everybody disclose, full sunshine. The next thing is that when the corporate person speaks, the corporate person must be, the majority of the shareholders, not the CEO. He's not the corporation. The people who hold stock in that company are the corporation. And so we believe that we need to at least pass legislation that says that there must be a resolution of the majority of the shareholders before they can expend money for electioneering purposes.
Well, now that sounds like a good idea, but is it sort of
not within this context? We can't do it, but that's why we're going to take the House majority back.
Got it. Okay, and was there
that's what we're going to do.
Was there any other leg to that stool that you are pushing for?
Yeah, but eventually we are going to have to pass a constitutional amendment. I introduced a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, called the Get Corporate Money Out of Politics Corporate Constitutional Amendment. And basically what it says is just a very few simple things. One is that money is not speech. Two, corporations are not people. And that...
Well, excuse me, I think Mitt Romney says just the opposite.
Yeah, Mitt would disagree. But I think that a corporation has no body to incarcerate, no soul to save. It lives forever. It has no conscience to persuade. And it's just not a natural person. So, they don't go to war unless it's to profiteer. Can you marry a corporate? It's ridiculous. It's a completely illegal fiction, and it needs to be dispensed with. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't have a history that's that old, quite frankly. It was actually the 14th Amendment, the amendment that was supposed to make the former slaves into citizens, that was used to create the fiction of the corporate person. And this is a fact, and our young people here should research it. It's fascinating. But the reality is, a corporation used to be something that was for the public good, that was done better by a private entity. Therefore, the public would charter this corporate entity for a limited purpose, for a limited time, and then could revoke it if they deviated from that purpose. Now, they just kind of do whatever they want to do. And as long as it's pursuit of profits. Now, I'm not against corporations. I used to own one, and I'm for them, but I do believe that they have to be subject to the rule of law. They should not have constitutionally protected First Amendment rights, and that they need to fulfill the public purpose that they were originally intended to, and I don't think that's asking too much.
See, the constitutional amendment that you're circulating would in effect undo Citizens United.
That's what it would do. That's the purpose. Yep.
And just to put a little background on it, as I understand it, in fact, I got a quotation here, President Obama said that Citizens United was a major victory for big oil, Wall Street banks, and health insurance companies.
He's
With a
right.
trifecta like that, I would think that maybe your amendment might have some legs.
Well, I think that the majority of the American people, whether they be Republicans or Democrats, progressives or even Tea Party members, agree with what I...
Well, I think surveys have
Yeah.
proven that out, haven't they?
Yeah, Americans are there.
And I know, Keith, that you've recently introduced a couple of bills having to do with electioneering.
Right.
And just for a little bit of background, the Republicans have embarked upon a campaign to suppress vote. They have successfully, in certain states, passed bills that purport to undermine the ability of ordinary people, the disadvantaged, youth,
Yep.
senior citizens
Yep.
from voting. So let's talk about the bill that I think is termed the Same-Day Registration Act. Can you tell us what that bill entails?
It just says that in a federal election, because of course, as a federal official, Congress can't really regulate local elections, but in a federal election, you can vote, you can register and vote on the same day. And then in the other one says that in a federal election, you cannot make an otherwise eligible voter ineligible because they don't have
Photo ID?
Government-issued ID. Now, that doesn't mean you can't require them to identify themselves. It just means that you can't tell, for example, Miss Dorothy Cooper, 94-year-old Dorothy Cooper, that she can't vote. Can I tell you who she is?
Go ahead, please.
Miss Dorothy Cooper is from Tennessee, and she's 94. And before segregation laws were destroyed, she could not vote because she was black. But after that, she voted in every single election that there was to vote in. She actually went to go vote. She had in her possession a photographic ID from the Chattanooga Police Department. She had her Social Security card. And when she presented herself to vote, as she had been doing since the 60s, they told her, this is not adequate. You cannot vote. And told her to go away. And she was denied the vote. So it's not just a photographic ID. It is the narrowly prescribed type of ID by the statute. Let me tell you how absurd it can get, Tim. In Texas, it is legal and valid to vote with your gun ID, but not valid for your college student ID. So if you are a college student at a Texas university and you show up to vote and you present your ID, here's my government-issued photographic ID, give me my ballot, they say that you can't vote with that. What else you got? But if you show up with your gun ID, they're like, oh, good, here's your ballot. So it's an absurdity. It is designed to exclude Americans from the ballot box. It's wrong. And another case in Indiana, 9 nuns were told they couldn't vote. All of them were in their 90s. When Sister Mary Margaret showed up to vote, they said, dear, are you ready to vote? She said, yes. I said, where's your government-issued ID? Sister Mary Margaret said, look, I'm 90. All I do is pray in the convent. I don't have an ID. And they said, well, you can't vote then. And she was sent away. This is a serious problem. Tim, did you know on any given day in Minnesota, about 30,000 people are applying for new IDs because they lost them? Now, if that happens to happen to you on election day, you are not going to vote.
You know, these bills are cropping up in every state. I think at least
34
states, and it's almost like it's happenstance, but
Yeah.
it isn't. It's a concerted effort on
ALEC.
the part of the Republicans.
Well, it's a group called, specifically a group called American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. They are a right-wing group paid for by the Koch brothers to push model bills. And so they have staff that recruits state legislators who will carry this stuff. And here's the thing. The problem is that 95% of all Americans who are adults have some sort of ID, so they think it's not a problem. But in an age when elections are won and lost by 1% of the vote, 5% can turn the tide. In the last election, the governor won by 8,700 votes. That's nothing. In the last senatorial election, the election was won by 312 votes. That's that's a precinct.
Yeah. In Minnesota, as I understand it,
They're pushing
this last session of the legislature, the Republicans had a bill that would only allow 3 forms: Minnesota driver's license, Minnesota issued photo ID, or some new form of voter ID. They would not allow a person to vote with a passport.
Wow.
They would not allow a military ID, and they would not allow a student ID. At least 10% of the population don't have the kinds of ID that they say are would be required to vote.
It's simply wrong. And here's the thing, Tim. The governor, bless his heart, thank goodness for, we ought to thank Governor Dayton. He's a good governor.
Best as far as I'm concerned.
Hey, he's all right. He vetoed that bill.
Absolutely.
But now they're going to come with a constitution. They want to circumvent the governor and put it on the ballot. And right now we're working to try to help people understand what this bill really is all about. It's not about getting rid of fraud. It's not about improving voter integrity. It's about kicking out people, and we're just not going to tolerate it.
The last thing I want to talk about with respect to your bill is the mythology that's been created by Republicans that they're out there to stop voter fraud. You must have looked into that as a part of this process.
Now, it's mythical. Now, the thing is that there is a legal provision that says that anybody who has a prior felony conviction is not legal to vote. And there have been people prosecuted for that. But that's not fraud. That's illegal voting. That's not fraudulent voting. Mm-hmm. So, because you can have fraudulent voting or imposter voting is when you present the identification of another person and represent yourself as that other person. These folks who were felons who voted, they didn't say they were somewhere else. They said they were who they were. It's just that they were not legally eligible to vote. And if you just do this ID game, you're not going to stop them because you can have a felony and still have a valid driver's license. And so what they're offering to fix the problem doesn't fix the problem.
Democratic Visions is handmade by volunteers for DFL Senate District 42, Lori Pryor, Chair.